Hi everybody, I'm Billy, and this is Antioch, Chapter 21, The Road to Golgotha. Andolin awoke. She sat up from her mat on the church floor. The door was shut. The hearth's fire was the only light. Michael knelt on the next mat, deep in thought. Noticing her, he said, "Did you dream?" She spoke blankly, preoccupied. "I did." "This is it then. What do you feel?" Andolin felt a radiating calm and acceptance, its character like the taste of water. The closest she could come to it in a word was, "Nothing." "No, that's not right. You should be having an overwhelming emotion, one strong enough that it grips in your body. I assure you, it is quite profound." "This is a profound and overwhelming nothing." "But nothing isn't an emotion. You can't open the way with nothing. What sort of things were in your dream?" "I was in a tunnel of light, surrounded by images and voices in the walls. They concerned the death of a woman named Sue." Though it had been a difficult memory before, Andolin found herself examining the details of it with clarity and without the urge to look away. "She was the first of our crew to be infected after we separated from Ezekiel. I killed her." "I see." Michael could not argue. Awakening, as they referred to it in the circle, was always the same, a golden tunnel of memories accompanied by a powerful emotion. She'd woken from the dream. From Michael's explanations of it, she had expected to dream of that night in the graveyard, when the Bowron had raked half of her face away. She now wore a black scarf over the damage. It looked less like a bandage. He said, "There is no certainty in the path we'll choose. Important events from our pasts will shape that choice, but it is often unexpected. What do you think it is?" "Perhaps I cannot do this. This nothingness could mean I am unable." She seemed wholly unaffected by the prospect. "No, I don't think so. It's a way that you feel. That's all that matters. Emotions can be difficult to put into words. Of the 6 beginnings, which would you say is closest to what you're feeling now?" "Repeat them, please." "Hate, love, sadness, anger, fear, or joy." Considering each, Andolin said, "This is not derivative." Michael shrugged. "They're just words, only helpful in study. The name of what you feel isn't as important as feeling it." Andolin sat still, being, without an opinion or a question. Her body functioned, and her 5 original senses provided her with information, none of which interested her attention. A new sense captivated her. She could feel Wynn. Michael studied her for a minute. It certainly was a strong physical expression of nothing. She wasn't doing anything at all, and she only spoke when he asked her to. "She might sit like this all day if I let her." He said, "I wouldn't worry about not being able to continue. In all the history of the church, there's never been a man who couldn't do this. The newly ordained are usually concerned about it. Are you concerned about that?" "I am remarkably unconcerned." "Ah, of course. If your path is truly nothing, then I suppose you won't be feeling much of anything for the rest of the day." He gave her opportunities to converse. "In case you were wondering, how long, of course, you're going to feel like this." "I was not." Michael chuckled. "This feeling is your path, what you'll use to open the way. It will always be near to you because of that, but not so strong again as it is now. It's normal to be overcome by it the day of the dream and then to simply sleep it off. That's how it happened with me. Mine is a path of anger, but it's no more vexing to me now than, say, buckling my belt. Well, perhaps that's a bit of an understatement. However, I can say that I've never been angrier than the day of my awakening." John found it rather humorous. Andolin said, "I have never felt more at peace." Golden images of Daniel's mother flashed and swirled around him. His favorite bedtime story echoed through him in her voice. "But the wizard didn't drink his blood, because the little boy's mommy woke him up just in time." She touched him on the nose. Then a shimmering Becca played in the field, a tiny version of their mother, squealing and trying to get Daniel to chase her. "Be the horse, Danny! Be the horse!" Then his father, huge and strong, taught him the importance of responsibility. "Never sleep past sunup, Dan. It's a sin to waste the day." Daniel remembered then that he was supposed to wake up if he'd fallen asleep. He knew he was asleep, and he chose to stay that way. John was cooking bacon for breakfast when he noticed Daniel stir. "Well, that was the sleep of the dead. I haven't seen you miss a sunrise before. Did you dream?" Daniel said, "Yes, sir." But something was wrong. Something horrible was swelling inside of him. John was delighted. "Oh, that's good. How did the dream make you feel?" He put his sizzling skillet on the dirt and rubbed his hands together with anticipation. Daniel hid his building turmoil by rubbing his eyes, but answered John's question with the truth. Sad! Though the contents of his dream had been happy, on awakening, the stark reality of his family's deaths confronted him like he'd never felt or understood them before that moment. John didn't notice the boy's distress and continued brightly. Really? I use a branch of sadness myself. After the way you put it on Davies, I'd have sworn you'd be one to use anger, like Michael. Oh, you should have seen him wake up. He was hopping mad. John laughed. This is exciting, but we'll need to narrow it down a little before we can really get going. Would you say it's more of a grief or a remorse that you're feeling? I don't know if you're aware of the difference between the two. Daniel couldn't hide his feelings anymore. They came sobbing out of him with tears and shouts. What are you talking about? What's happening to me? John suddenly understood and hurried over. Oh no! Forgive me, son. Oh, how careless of me. I forgot to tell you how strong it is the first time. I should have warned you. It's going to be all right. Don't worry. I feel like they died. They died again, and they're never coming back. I know they're not. Daniel wailed and hugged his knees. They're gone. No. John knelt next to him and held him. Shh. It's all right. It's all right. I'm here, son. I'm here. Don't worry. Daniel was inconsolable. John didn't sleep that day. The next, Daniel woke up with the sun. There was a large breakfast ready for him with milk. He needed it. He couldn't eat or drink at all the day before, and had cried so much the muscles in his face were sore. John waited for him to speak. Daniel finished eating first. I don't want to feel like that ever again. I don't want to learn the way anymore. John said, I'm very tired. Give me an extra hour or two today, okay? Daniel had expected an argument. Yes, sir. That afternoon they traveled deep into a pine woodland and had little conversation along the way. That evening, before settling down to camp on the dry needles, they noticed the air was hazy and smelled of wood smoke. It had accumulated gradually, but was on the verge of causing them to cough. John feared a forest fire was coming. What is this, Uncle John? What's going on? I don't know. Go ahead and set us out something to eat. The air's cleaner near the ground. Daniel did as he was told. John left the animals packed. Throughout dinner, as it had been all day, the boy was ready to refuse practicing, but the old man never brought it up. John stayed watching the direction of the wind. Their campfire's light reflected from the haze and turned the trees into tall, glowing sentinels. John felt he could have seen farther in the dark. Daniel said, I'm going to bed now, assuming that would bring out the argument. But John didn't even look at him. Good night, son. Get some rest. Daniel lay down, feeling like a complete disappointment, feeling about to cry again. Despite John's assurance it had been normal, it embarrassed Daniel to have wept a whole day away. He frowned and sat up, fighting back the tears. He didn't really want to stop learning. Uncle John, what's Wren? John turned from his vigil to respond. Oh, well, that's important. We should talk about that. He scratched his beard and gave it some thought. You know, honestly, I don't know what it is. Huh? I know what it does, but I don't really know what it is. No one does, though they'll certainly say they do. For instance, Gabriel believes Wren is our connection to God, that it is our spirit flowing out of God. Do you believe in God, Daniel? Pa said Ma wouldn't have passed if there was a God, so I don't guess there is. John couldn't respond to that. Then Daniel said, What about Michael? He's pretty smart. What's he got to say about it? John smiled. Michael once told me he thought it was time. Daniel's face opened, and he put his hands on his head. Because time heals all wounds. Then his hands came down, and he looked as though he held a giant invisible ball, helpless before its wonder. John stared at him for a second. That's not... Yes, that was why. It's difficult to discover the truth about a thing, when only a handful of men can discuss it. I know this much. When I give you hospital, I'm letting Wren into your body. A great deal more than is normally there. You always have Wren inside of you, you see, but for some reason your body's natural response to a lot of it is to fall asleep. When you can overcome that response, you can begin learning how to control and channel it by yourself. Will I always be sad when I do it? Never like that again, I promise you. But you will feel sadness more than you did before. Sometimes it's something you try to avoid feeling that comes forward on awakening. What do you feel when you do it? Regret. About what, Uncle John? John sighed, scratching his chin. Abandoning your father and your grandmother? Honestly, son, did you even have to ask? And please, stop calling me Uncle John. That's gone on long enough. Daniel frowned, but conceded to have been a bit thick. "Sorry." John nodded pensively, keeping his hand at his mouth. It was his left, and it was uncovered. Daniel had been meaning to ask him how he'd lost his ring finger. John said, "We're each of us given a path, only one, never to know what it is until awakening. It becomes a defining influence in our lives. Some even allow for strange abilities, like Abraham's. His path is contempt. That has its beginning in hatred. It doesn't make him a bad man, of course. Hatred is something all of us feel." What was I saying? Oh, he discovered that it lets him open the way in others without needing to touch their skin. Oh, that's important too. When we do that to someone else, that's actually their Rin coming into them. We call that pulling. It's a more advanced technique. "How'd you lose that finger?" John shook his head, realizing Daniel hadn't been listening. Then he held up his hand. "My little devil's mark? I got this from a nasty pest that was fouling a farmer's well, by living in it. Poor fellow's wife refused to come home until it was gone. This thing was like a frog and a man all jumbled up into one. And slimy? You wouldn't believe. Ugh." Of all the devils John had told him about, Daniel thought a slimy frog-man who would live in your well was the most disgusting by far. He didn't want to think about what it did in the water. I've never seen another one like it. Dying breed, I suppose. Well, I was green at the time, and I had this notion it would be a lot easier to put him to sleep first. So I gave the bucket line a tug, and here he comes, scrabbling up out of the dark, all claws and teeth, about the size of a dog, I'd say. I thought, simple enough. Reached in there and grabbed him. Daniel's eyes bulged. John felt a pinch at the knuckle, remembering it. Only he didn't want to hold still for hospital, and those teeth, those were sharp. That was an important lesson for me. If you want to kill something, keep your hands sheathed and use a sword. Did you get him? No, he got the best of me, but I think I scared him near to death yanking him out of the well like that. He certainly cleared off to find a safer place to live. The farmer got his water back, anyway, and his wife, and, if I remember, gave me a sack of apricots for my trouble. John looked at his hand again. Poor trade. Uncle John? Uncle John, wake up. It's time to get up. The smoke's gone. The haze had blown away. John was relieved. He had trouble getting to sleep that morning, worried Daniel wouldn't be able to keep a good watch in those thick trees, but the threat of a forest fire seemed to be over. They headed west before 1:30 that afternoon, and by 3 o'clock found the ruins of a small village, where the haze had come from. The cottages were reduced to blackened frames and ash. A few broken heaps still smoldered, but the violence was over. Villagers lay dead in the lanes dividing the wreckage. John wanted to shield Daniel from the sight, to take him away from there, but he knew there might be people in need. He couldn't leave the boy alone. Daniel would have to come with him and be branded by the tragic scene. Daniel gaped at the indiscriminate casualties, men, women, and children. Was this Golgotha? No, we won't reach Golgotha for another few days. That's an old city made of stone, larger than this and on a hilltop. I don't know what this place was. A newer settlement, maybe? This is terrible. Daniel started thinking out loud. We were too slow. The Bowron got here ahead of us because I couldn't handle waking up, and we lost that day. He started to cry. No, son, don't say that. Let's think. This doesn't look like Bowron to me. They don't leave bodies behind. I don't know what's happened here yet, but maybe there's someone we can help. Daniel nodded, sniffling. They called out as they walked their animals through the ruins, searching, but no one answered. The buildings had been burned with torches and oil. The people had been slashed and run through. It was the work of men. John had seen enough. There's nothing we can do. This was over yesterday. The sun came through the trees to the west. We're losing light. I don't want to be anywhere near here after dark. Daniel agreed. A broad track led away from the village in the direction they were headed, the first thing close to a road since Antioch. It made an easy way for them, and they followed it to make better time. But, as they went, they couldn't help watching its ends and feeling it was more dangerous on it than off. Less than an hour from the slaughtered village, 4 men on horses guarded the way ahead. They wore sleek black uniforms with silver crosses threaded into their chests, striking against the forestial greens. They didn't notice John and Daniel. Daniel whispered, frightened. Uncle John? John was frightened too. On his own he feared very little, but with Daniel, danger had a different meaning entirely. He didn't know if they should back up and try to take cover, thereby looking suspicious if spotted, or make themselves known by calling out. His uncertainty was short-lived. The horsemen started shouting in a language other than Meroan, drew out thin, silvery rapiers, and charged. John felt his filly close to bolting. He did the only thing he could think of to protect Daniel. He leapt to the ground. "Get off the cow! They'll ride you down!" Daniel jumped. With the horsemen only seconds away at a furious gallop, John shouted, "Hold on to the tree!" Daniel didn't understand. Which tree? John seized him from behind by the collar and the belt and swung him into the air. The world lurched. Daniel hit the sticky bark of a pine 15 feet off the ground and latched on out of instinct. Below, the rush of hooves arrived. John's Callaghan struck flesh and rang 4 times in the length of a heartbeat. Then there was squealing, hollering, and a rolling crash like a landslide. Daniel inched and twisted to see, not knowing what he'd heard. The riders were staggering up from the ground. An unimaginable volume of blood leapt in arterial rhythm from their dying mounts. John had struck down the horses. One rider landed on his feet, sharp and poised to fight, as though his mount had been cut out from under him 1,000 times before. He took a bow from his shoulder, nocked an arrow, and shot in one flawless motion. The shaft stopped with a thud in John's chest. John looked down at it, said, "Oh?" and took a threatening step forward with his bloody sword. The sharp fighter took a step back. The other men shouted some more, and then all 4 ran away into the woods. Daniel shouted from the tree, "You killed the horses? Why'd you kill the horses?" John tore out the arrow with a blast of light. He looked up and shouted back, "I don't know who those men are. Better to kill a horse if you've got a choice." Daniel slipped and clutched, feeling like he was going to cry again. Those are the ones who did the village that way." "We don't know that. Did you understand anything they said?" "No." "Well, neither did I." "You killed the horses." "Fwah! Get down from there. We need to get out of here." The Pinto hadn't gone far. John ran out to catch her. They didn't make a fire that night and settled down far away from the road. John knelt and watched. Daniel wept in his blankets. They knew they were being followed. Daniel whispered, "Why did you kill the horses? You could have gotten them right then." John said, "Son, what if those men were from the village?" Daniel hadn't considered that. He doubted it, but it made him think. John had second thoughts as well. "I did the best I could." The 4 unhorsed men kept their distance, whispering their different language in the bushes. The one named Fagin said, "Did you see how he threw that kid into the tree? That man isn't normal. He could have killed all of us if he'd wanted to. Even you, Judas. You hit him dead center." Judas didn't agree. "We'll see. I'll hit him in the face next time. I just couldn't resist that yellow circle. It was too much of a target." "Next time? Doesn't it mean anything to you that he spared your life?" "It means he has questionable judgment. I would have killed me." Fagin couldn't argue with that. "I want to find out more about them. If he wouldn't kill us, I doubt he's going to cause any trouble in town. We'll follow them in and tell Bishop what we saw." Judas shrugged. "It's your decision. Bishop is going to be angry with you. You've found another reason to disobey orders." "It's not my fault. We're done here without the horses. Besides, Pierce's arm is broken." Fagin motioned at Pierce, who sat with his arm in his lap and his face dripping with sweat. He'd fallen badly from his horse. Fagin said, "We need to get out of these damned woods." Judas calculated everything. True. Over the following 2 days, those men regretted having forced John and Daniel off the road into the wilderness. They didn't have any milk or bacon or pickled apples stowed in those handsome black and silver uniforms. They were exhausted, thirsty, and brush-beaten when they finally came home to their tall stone city. And the sky burned red at sunset. From another way around, John and Daniel stopped at the foot of Golgotha's hill. Tall crosses made of pine picketed the rocky incline. Hanging in the centers of those looming black shapes were the shadows of the crucified. John bowed his head. This is an evil place. He feared it was wrong to have brought Daniel along, and thought of the life the boy could have had in Antioch. Daniel couldn't look away. These people are devils. We ought to let the Bowron have them. That is the end of Chapter 21. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can follow the link at the top of my website, www.williameharlan.com, and purchase the full novel from Amazon in ebook format for $2.99 or as a paperback for $12.99. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for Chapter 22, Angelus Bells.